Welcome, everyone. This is Randy from Snap Judgments. Good morning. I've got Joe Stokowski here with me today. He is a speed expert. Um, I'm just going to let him introduce himself and tell you all the things that he does right now that are correlate here to the scouting combine for us in the 40-yard dash this week, which is a popular event, and nobody understands better than Joe. So, Joe, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, that was way too kind of an intro. But yeah, no, my name is Joe Stokowski. Currently kind of between schools right now, finishing out my year here at Grayson High School, where I was the special teams coordinator, director of sports science, and currently the track coach, and then heading to Gainesville High School here in Georgia for next football season. So yeah, that's kind of my background working with speed with athletes, and obviously that ties very well into the football and the track side of things.
Yeah, I mean, look, everybody tunes in this week to watch the 40-yard dash times. They watch them in short clips on Twitter. They watch them on NFL Network. Very few people understand them. Joe is one of the few people that really does. So I guess just kind of get right into it. And let's talk about kind of why the raw 40 time is misleading. Why is it not enough to just say a guy ran, say, a 4.43? Why does that not tell you enough information?
Right. So obviously every year we see people who run incredibly fast 40s are the top people in their position, and then they get to the NFL and it doesn't translate, right? The fastest player doesn't always become the best player, and that's something that's very, very obvious to us as observers of the sport. So really the way I view it is more that you have to have a certain prerequisite of speed in comparison to your size, in comparison to your position to be successful. And that doesn't matter if it's 7-year-old football or all the way to the Super Bowl, right? Think of like as a corner. I need to be fast enough that if they attack me vertically, I can keep up, right? But being the fastest player is only beneficial to me if I also have the best knowledge of my opponent, the best reflexes, the best change of direction. And so the way I view it is that it's a tool in your toolbox that you need, right? But it is not in any way, shape, or form the most important tool, more than it is just something that you need to. It just needs to be good enough, I guess, is the simplest way to put that, in
Okay.
order to play your position at the NFL level.
Yeah, and if it's your only tool, that's not going to be sufficient at the NFL level anyway. Maybe at other levels, having explosive speed like that and just that is enough, but not at the NFL level.
Oh, absolutely correct. And you're really starting to, and we'll get into the minutia of this, but you really start getting to split hairs at certain, you know, uh, 0.15 seconds on a 40. Yeah, it's going to make headlines this week, but it's not going to necessarily be the thing that makes the headlines going in over the course of an NFL player's career.
Right. And now, one thing that interested me now, so I came to know your name, I guess, through an article that you had written, it looks like about 5, 6 years ago, called Speed Goals. I have it on a simplifaster.com is the website that I found it on. And this really breaks down the prior 5 years of combined 40-yard times, right down into you get it into the quarters, essentially 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40. And one thing that really interested me, and I'm going to, if you don't mind, just pop up a little graphic from that article there, where you talk about two athletes you had that ran identical times, the 4.73 and the 40. But you lay out the differences in how they achieved that time. Can you kind of talk about what this sort of thing tells you about the differences between the players?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can see in this chart at the top there, you have a player who got through the first 10 yards much quicker than the other player. When it comes to football, all things being equal, you would want your player to be probably better as an accelerator than he is at the top end than vice versa, right? Because most of the game is going to be played at acceleration. The 40-yard dash itself was designed to evaluate the distance that it would take for somebody to cover on a punt. And it's kind of morphed and melded into all these different things. But originally, that's what the idea of the 40 was. You talk about why is everybody in a 3-point stance? Well, if you look back at old film, receivers were in 3-point stances, right? And so it's kind of this this arcane thing that's just kind of kept on going, and it's become so popular. So I'll actually give you some background on that. That top number there, 473 with the 158, that was, and this was a long time ago. So don't take this number as what he is now, because he's now in his 6th year of college. But Peyton Rhodes, who played at Sacred Heart University for the last 6 years, who's actually in the draft process right now. And so one thing we were able to see with his number specifically is because he was so good 0 to 10 and such an elite accelerator, in the context of what I was working with at the time, that's the player that was best to go block a punt, right? Where the player that's below him, that's a better player to go cover on a kickoff. And so that's where you can really start making some decisions on personnel based off their speed profile, right? Are they a better accelerator versus top ender, or vice versa? I bring up Peyton, like I said, because he's going through the draft process right now, and has his pro day coming up, and has some aspirations to go 4.4, and
It'll be a lot faster, you think, huh?
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, this is from his junior year of high school, which would have been back in 2000. So he's come a long way. He's come a long way since then.
Yeah.
I also, and this is going to get really deep in the weeds and the minutia of this. So the number that you're seeing there was us timing using a free lapse system. And so one thing that you could simply do is if you want to chop off 0.08 seconds off of the 40 itself and then the 0 to 10. The reason I say that is that in conversations I've had with the people at Zybeck, the actual true FAT times that are taken at the combine, and this is something that's a little bit above my head, but I don't know if there's a NDA or what, but those don't go public. Those don't get shared. Those are only in-house. So I've asked them some questions before about not specific athletes, but larger trends, right? And so the data that we see publicly, which is hand-started laser finished, on average is about 0.08 seconds faster than their in-house FAT data. So what I'm saying there is, you see 4.73, you go, oh, that's maybe not that fast. But like if I told you it was 4.65, right, for a high school junior, now all of a sudden, like that, some people would say that puts them in a different category. So that's where you're seeing, that's where you're seeing some of these numbers come from. And so like for a high school kid, if they can run an FAT 40 under 4.7, that's incredibly fast. And I think we'll probably dive in more to these sections on how it translates from high school to college and college to the pros.
Yeah. And I had, in reading your article, it seemed like you felt like a lot of the work that can be done to trim down 40 times is done in that first 10 yards, essentially coming off the blocks, right? So how would you differ your approach in working with, say, the top player and the bottom player in improving their speed at both 40 time and just kind of overall play speed too?
Yeah, for sure.
And are those two different things also?
Yeah, I mean, it's two different buckets. And I went back, the article that you mentioned, I went back and read it again this morning to kind of remind myself of what I wrote. And there was a couple links from the original article that have been, it's been probably copied and pasted by the website itself so many times it got lost. But Cameron Jose, who put out when he was at the time, I think he was at University of Indiana and then spent some time at Auburn, he actually came up with a bucket of exercises. So if an athlete is deficient in 0 to 10, this is what he needs to focus on. Or 10 to 20, this is what he needs to focus on. Or 20 to 30, 30 to 40. And as you look at that spectrum, right, the first 10 is going to be more strength, right, and mobility. And when I say mobility, what I mean is if you think about what an athlete looks like when they get down to a 3-point stance, and really think about it, like if you're a receiver, the only time you ever have to get into a stance with a hand on the ground is in this assessment, right? Or if you're a track and field athlete in a 4-point stance. Everything else you're going to do is going to be from a 2-point, unless maybe you're, I don't know, coming off the edge to block a kick or something like that. But for
Right.
the most part, it's all going to be done out of a 2-point stance. The angles that are created in the ankle, knee, and hip out of a 3-point stance, those are such acute, sharp angles that the ability to turn those angles into a straight line. And when I say a straight line, we've all seen what that looks like when a really elite athlete comes out of a block, right? You can draw a straight line between, you can draw the heel, knee, butt, head, right? We know what that looks like.
Right.
And so in order to do that, that's incredibly difficult to do. Most young athletes, and when I say young, I'm talking 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, it's their strength to weight ratio and their mobility. We see such great gains in those areas when, a boy turns into a man and they go through puberty, where you're going to gain a lot more in that first 10. Now, I will tell you the second line that you see there, that athlete was a kid who was a much better track speed person than he was necessarily a, quote unquote football speed person. And some of that was because he was just not a super mobile kid, tight ankles, tight, stiff ankles. And I mean that in the best and the worst way. Like, he was a good triple jumper, right? But he was also did not do a good job of yielding in the weight room. And what I mean by yielding is being able to get into more severe positions to be able to express strength, right?
Okay.
And so yeah, that's where, when you talk about that 0 to 10, that mobility and that strength, relative strength is really where you're going to see a lot of that. And then, I hope this makes sense. So like the earlier in, like if you're deficient earlier in the 40, it's more of a strength and mobility issue. If it's later, it's more of a neurological issue. And what I mean by that is, what makes something quick twitch, right? You talk about different types of muscle fibers, but also just the body feeling it and doing it, right? So you may 0 to 10 may be in the bucket of just things that we all know to be weight room exercises, right? Where somebody deficient on the back end, we may something a little bit more complex, like getting a 1080 and pulling them at a velocity just 2% faster than they would run on their own, something like that to train that nervous system. So I know I talked about a lot of things there, but I hope that kind of gives a framework of how I look at training that.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting to me because, you mentioned kind of like a just development of person, growth of from a boy to a man, right? Say age 12, 13, 14 to like 17, 18, 19, right? Depending on your own personal kind of clock or whatever, right?
Right.
But there's also a similar, I feel like there's also a similar jump from, say, that age, 17, 18, 19 to like 24, 25. You're going to have so I'm wondering what kind of what lessons that from seeing things in a younger kid like 12, 13, 14, and how they age, that could be drawn over to prospects that you might see now running at 2021 at the combine, but they're not quite fully grown into kind of like that, I don't know, man body or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, because there's a difference between 20 and 25, kind
Yes.
of fill out a little more, get a little more core. And so I'm wondering what kind of lessons that you learn from that development of a kid from 12, 13, 14 to the second stage of growth, and then that can be applied to that kind of third stage of growth.
Well, let me take you all the way back real quick. So,
Yeah.
Long story short, I get this job in Georgia. I move down here. This max velocity sprint training is becoming more in vogue. I buy a free lap system and I start recording this data. And I wanted a way to cross-reference the data with the gold standard, right? The NFL Combine. And so I go through and make this model, right? And the article goes through what that model looks like. It's pretty simple, but like what a section should be. Like if I want to run, yeah, there it is. So like if I want to run a 4.6, like everything you see in this chart is dictated by data that we found from the 40 itself, right? COVID hits, everybody's doing these Zoom meetings, right? And I'm in a Zoom call with Tony Villani down at XPE Sports in Florida. And if you follow the 40, every year it's if they don't have the fastest person at the combine, they have, 3 of the 5 or 7 of the 10.
Okay.
And that chart you see there, a much more colorful version of that chart, pops up in his presentation. And I wasn't at the time like trying to monetize it. I was just curious about the thing. And the presentation got stopped, and they're like, the guy who created that chart is actually in the crowd right now. And that day I met Tony, and we've kind of built this friendship where essentially I talk about my perspective at the threshold of high school to college, and he explains to me the threshold of college to the pros.
Okay.
And then what we've really found over the years is that it is much, and this is going to kind of belabor the point I made earlier, it is much easier to make a kid marginally faster on the back end of their 40 than it is to get them faster on the front 20 of their 40, right? And that kind of framing that you put where a 15-year-old looks different than a 20-year-old, but a 20-year-old looks different than a 25-year-old, right?
Yeah.
That building that strength and that relative power as the body gets bigger, right, is something that can be captured from somebody, I want to say like post-puberty, but post-puberty, like really growing into the adult body that they're going to have.
Right.
And so what he was using the data for at that time, and I thought this was really interesting. So he was getting athletes coming back to him in return to play protocols, right? And so a player
Right.
says like, I want to get back to football speed, right? But let's say the player has like a hamstring injury. He doesn't want to necessarily have them run all the way out to 40 and hit those high velocities. So what he was using the chart to do was essentially like, I want you to get back to a 4.4, like 10 yards at a time. So I want you to get like, I want you to get to 1.54 through 10. And then I want you to be able to get through, 2.58 through 20, right? And build the athlete back up, because the max speed is not as tough to train, in my opinion, as the early part.
Okay.
But the max speed portion is probably also a little bit more, let's call it fragile and volatile, right? Like when you see a
Okay.
kid pull their hamstring, they rarely pull it in the acceleration phase. It's usually the top end phase, right? And so he was using it as a return to play kind of post rehab protocol. And when I heard that he was doing that with, I'm not going to name drop here, but like with some NFL players and that are household names, I was like, man, this is really cool that I had some sort of positive impact in the industry. But yeah, so that's
Right.
I don't know if that totally answered the question, but that's kind of the framework of what this chart does. And I'll be completely honest with you. I have not done a ton of 40 timing because the school I'm at currently, we have over 220 players in the football program, and 40s are difficult. So talking about this, I feel like I know Jimmy Buffett always said like he didn't like singing Cheeseburger in Paradise, but you're Jimmy Buffett, so you got to play Cheeseburger in Paradise. So the 40 is kind of that for me. Like I kind of look at a lot of things through like a post 40-yard dash lens, but it is cool to kind of go back and look at it. And
Yeah.
I'm changing schools again, so I may go back to some of this stuff.
This is kind of off my planned questions, if you will, but as we're talking about kind of development and stuff, something that comes to mind for me, and a question for someone like you, is there's a lot of talk around this time of year of kids going from college to the pros and like, well, they're not quite big enough. We'd like to see them add, X amount of pounds, 10 pounds or whatever, but not lose speed. Where do you, what just kind of like overall, what do you have to say about that sort of idea and how that might differ from position to position too?
Absolutely. So I will just call on something that happened to me yesterday. So Tony Villani put out a thing where he was looking at 3 different metrics when it was looking at general KPIs, key performance indicators, for things that they were going to see from athletes at the combine, right? And they were looking at a 5-yard into 10. So like I accelerate for 5 and then I measure how fast I can run the next 10. A 20 into 10. So I get 20 yards of acceleration. So that's more of a max velocity, and then a broad jump, right? And the athlete that he showed was proficient at all the things except for the max velocity, right? And so it was, what would you address with this athlete? And what I said is that you have to zoom out and you have to look at, and I use this with my athletes all the time. What is your superpower, right? If your superpower is your speed and you try to make yourself more well-rounded but lose your superpower, now what, right? So there are a lot of high school kids that are going to be faster at 155 than they are at 170, right?
Right.
And so sometimes you just like to be the best version of yourself, you can't fit into that NFL combine cookie cutter model. Think like Devontae Smith, for instance, right? If Devontae Smith added another 20 pounds, he might be more durable, but he also might get hit more because he's not as fast, right?
Right.
And so you really need to look at kind of every athlete in their own, and I hate to say this, but at the end of the day, it's all genetics, right? The kid that can keep improving size and keep improving speed, like that's why they're in the NFL, right? Like
Right.
that's why they get there, is that their genetics is keeping up with the work that they're putting in. And so yeah, like you said, like, well, this guy's got to gain 10 more pounds. Everything has a pro and con to it, right?
Right.
And it's the ones that the pros far outweigh the cons when they add to their tools and their buckets, right? Speed, size, strength. Those are the ones that really kind of athletically pull themselves out from the pack.
Right. Right. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So sorry, just kind of going down my guided questions here. Um, you've got it broken down a lot in this article, into the different kind of bucket, right? The different kind of tenths or fourths rather, 10-second sections. And then you talk about the flying 30 being in 30 seconds or 3 seconds or less. Sorry, 3 seconds or less. And that being a benchmark for the high school athletes that you coach. I'm not sure how would it be a lot faster, you think, for guys at the combine, I imagine. But could you talk about the flying 30? I know I'd heard about the flying 20 for a number of years also. I feel like the evolution of how we judge the 40 has really changed over the years. So could you talk about kind of the flying 30 that you referenced there, and maybe the flying 20 that also is talked about, and then maybe anything that's happened, because it has been 5 or 6 years since you wrote this article. So
Right. I view it kind of like I'm just making up this term, but like sandwich model, right? So I'm going to work on the accelerative things, right? So how fast can I get through 5, through 10, through 20, right? And then I'm going to look at how fast can I run a 30-yard fly, right? Can I get that number under 3.00 seconds, right? Does it take me, how many yards does it take me? Does it take me 20 yards worth of acceleration to get those next 30 under 3 seconds, right? If it does, I'm not accelerating quick enough to be able to break 4.7.
okay.
Can I do it in 15 yards? If I can, great. Now can I move it up to 10? So can I give myself only 10 yards of acceleration and still get that number under 3.0? Because the secret sauce of the whole thing is that can I get 0 to 20 under 2.70? And can I get 10 to 40 under 3.00? And if I can find 1/100th of a second somewhere in there, then I run sub 4.7.
Right. And
So,
that's the benchmark. That's the goal for athletes that you're coaching in high school, essentially.
right. So like if I have a kid who's on a laser to laser FAT 40, right? And there's all different, and I'm not going to go into this rabbit hole, but like there's all different types of lasers, how they time, how accurate they are, why they're accurate when they are, and why they're not when they're not, right? But for the hardware that I use, for me at this point, if a kid can break 4.70 laser to laser, which would be like, think about 4.62 hand start to laser.
Right, with the .08
They're in a
error that you spoke
right.
about, right?
That kid,
Okay.
if they have adequate size and they can play football, they're going to be a Division I skill kid.
Okay.
Right. I mean,
So that's the benchmark for speed at that level.
And I say this as someone who I was the head coach of a high school in Illinois that had, 180 kids in the high school that was so small that we co-opted with another school down the road from us. So our combined enrollment was 360. Now I'm at a high school that has over 3,800 students and over 200 athletes on the football team, and every year we send somewhere from 9 to 12 guys early signing period to major colleges. So my frame of reference has changed massively as the quality of athlete I've had physically has changed over the jobs that I've taken. But that same threshold still holds true. Anybody that can break 4.7 laser to laser, who's a skill kid, is going to have speed to produce big results on Fridays, regardless of the level of high school football.
Okay, and then as that translates to the NFL, now again, I'm borrowing these images from your article.
Absolutely.
Just because I figured you would be familiar with them. But this says this chart shows the public data from the NFL Scouting Combine fairs when cross-referenced with the original chart. So how, like, obviously we were talking about kind of high school kid numbers in the first chart, right? What are you seeing in terms of how it relates to the different sections of the 40 on this chart?
Right. And as you look at the chart, what that's saying is like where it says number and it says 7, it's saying that in the data that I have, 7 athletes ran below 4.30. The average of those 7 was 4.27. The average of their first 10 was 1.50. Like that's how to read that chart.
Okay. All right.
And that is that, like, for the most part, speed profiles kind of work the same, right? Like guys who are good accelerators are usually good on the top end, right? Like it's not like these are like completely separate buckets that don't affect one another, right? They're very closely related siblings. They're just not identical twins, right? And so the problem with some of this data, and I hope this makes sense. So like if you look at the line where it says 68 in the number, 4.84, right? So a skill kid or a skill player at the NFL Combine runs an incredibly slow 4.81 40 for a running back, right? That athlete probably has a different speed profile than a lineman because a lineman doesn't have the same ability to have a good max speed. So think of like a freaky defensive lineman running 4.8, right? 330 pounder. That athlete might actually be better through 10 than that running back who's now not going to get drafted because he didn't hit the minimum threshold, right? Okay. So what I'm saying is like the averages, it all comes out in the wash because this chart itself that you're looking at here doesn't differentiate between how big the athletes were.
Right. Okay. Which makes sense. This is
and
pulled up the other one positionally.
Right. So here you can kind of look at what each kind of subgroup ran. And so like the one thing that you don't have on this chart would be like, if you look at, I'm trying to think of 2 positions that would be kind of similar but different. Just maybe think of like, okay, every O lineman that runs 4.9 to 5.1 versus every defensive end that runs 4.9 to 5.1, right? They're just going to have probably a different profile in that the longer, leaner athlete is probably going to be better top end, where the offensive lineman himself, like the larger you are, the better you have to start because you don't have the same max velocity ability because of gravity, right?
Right.
I hope that makes sense. Where if you're going to be elite as a large person, yes, your max velocity needs to be good relative to you, but you have to be a good starter.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. I know that getting into kind of the size differential here, because that was a little bit of what you talked about in the pounds per square inch, right? Is that where you're looking for?
Ooh, it's simpler than that. Pounds per inch. So
pounds per inch.
What do I weigh divided by how many inches tall I am?
Okay.
So a simple round, right? As somebody who's 5'10" is 70 inches tall, right? If I'm 210 pounds divided by 70, that number is 3.0.
Right.
So like if you look at that ratio, that's similar to like a running back. So here, like if you look at the 4th line down, the running back average height was 5'10", the average weight was 214. That puts their pounds per inch at 3.057. And simply all pounds per inch is a way to it's a way to understand the size of your athlete in relation to how tall they are. because like a 300 pounder at 6'5" is a lot different than a 300 pounder at 5'5", right? But I don't want the weight metric in data that I'm tracking to, oh, it's the same. No, it's not the same, right? Because they're completely different shaped humans, right? So that's where that number kind of comes in. And then I have this whole other chart where you simply, it's a chart where imagine, the x-axis is size and the y-axis is speed. I know this is probably not good for a verbal medium, but down in the bottom left corner of the chart is small and slow, and up in the top right corner is big and fast, right? And so when we look at like large scale, like working with 200 athletes, what I want to do is pull that kid to the top right corner of that chart, right? And so like I can move to the right of that chart by getting bigger, and I can move up the chart by getting faster, right? And we want the kid to move in a diagonal ratio up in that direction. And so those are things that, like, who ends up getting to go to the NFL? Usually the people that get to go to the NFL are the ones who went to college and got bigger and faster. That bigger and faster got them to be better at the sport. So now they have those prerequisite size and speed. And because of those things, like physical ability and football ability, they're married and benefit one another, right? Being right, like if I'm, for instance, like if I'm a 320-pound nose tackle and I lose 40 pounds, I'm absolutely faster than I was before, but now I can no longer take on a double team, right? At the college level. So it's all kind of a sliding scale, and then you have people like Jordan, what was his name? The guy from UGA a couple years ago that went out there and ran
Jordan Davis.
Jordan Davis, and people like that, they just break every model I've created. People like that just break the model because they're just they're doing it at such a freaky level.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point from my perspective. I'm curious what Jordan Davis's RAS score would be. But what do you think about the RAS score that's given out throughout this process to NFL draft prospects? Do you feel like that properly accounts for size? Like, I know that I have friends who feel like the heavier you are, the more challenging it is, but you're not getting, like, you're the same vertical. Like, a guy who's 300 pounds jumps a 32-inch vertical. A guy who's 330 pounds jumps a 32-inch vertical. It's not the same thing, even though it's the same result.
Right. So Math Bomb, that's my guy. I actually just turned on.
That's exactly who my friend says he was talking to about this too. So
I turned on notifications on my phone this morning. So every tweet he sends out over the next week will go directly to my phone, and I will look at all of those. Okay, so like the RAS score is really, 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 really cool. And what he does, I'll be honest, all these numbers that you see are pulled from his database, and I give him credit every chance I can. It's not necessarily like, you're more looking at, like, when you compare RAS scores, the cohort in which you're in, right? So for instance, and the one thing that the RAS score maybe doesn't do a good job of is, like, you'll get a bump for being a fast lineman. You're in the cohort of being a lineman, right? But you're undersized. So you get, I hope this makes sense. You get docked for not being big enough, right? That box is going to pop red. And if you know the RAS scores, you know what I'm talking about. That box will pop red, but then all the other metrics will pop green.
Right.
That's the only thing I don't love about it. Because, like, if I'm undersized and I'm going to the combine, it's because I'm a freak athlete. So, like, you can't be small and slow and go to the combine, right? You know what I mean? Like, there's a reason you're good. There's a reason you got invited. And so that's the one thing I don't like. Or the one thing that, like, when I look at a RAS score, I always look at, when I say I don't like, I love everything that he does. But the one thing that I always have to look at is he big enough? Is he green on size? And then is he green in some other area? And if that's true, right? Like, if he's in the 85th percentile for size in his cohort, and then he's also in the 79th percentile for speed, all of a sudden, okay, I have a big and fast athlete.
Right. And I mean, there's, like, just off the top of my head in this particular year's class that I can think of, on the defensive line, you've got Grayson Halton, who's a little bit of an undersized defensive lineman, explosive, fast, etc. And then at the same position, Dante Corleone, who's a little bit of a bowling ball at the defensive line position. He's like also, about 6'6", 6'1", but like 330. So it's just very different body types, but they're in the same bucket, basically, right?
Well, what's interesting is that if could you go back to the chart that has the positions?
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at this chart, right, like there's 39 players that are listed under edge, right?
Yeah.
That number has exploded because that wasn't even a thing when I started tracking this data. Like
right.
That position wasn't a thing. So like guys, if you look, like depending on their body shape and where they project, they desperately want to get put in either the D line or the edge bucket. And that all goes to how much I can get paid on the rookie wage scale and how much I can, what if I end up being the best of the best, what's my franchise tag look like later, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what's interesting with let's just call them tweeners, right? That's what's interesting with the tweeners is what I did in college in the scheme in which I played is what they're going to ask me to do at the next level going to translate in the same way.
Right.
For instance, like if I'm in the AFC North, playing teams that are going to run the ball all the time, I might have to spend a lot more time in the box than I did at college when I was playing in the ACC, right? Because I was always going to be out of the box. All right. So am I more of an outside linebacker? Am I more of a hybrid? Am I more of an inside, or am I more of an edge? And so that to me is one of the most interesting thresholds to follow when you talk about college to pro, is guys that are kind of in those gray areas for size and speed and length and kind of where they get slotted. Because for the most part, if you think about this too, like athletes have become so specialized in their thing, right?
Right.
Quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, linemen, O-line, but it's those kind of interior perimeter, using an oxymoron there, defensive players that I find to be so interesting because you can use them in so many versatile ways depending on what your scheme is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, you could really even argue breaking down some of these positions into further buckets, like wide receiver. There's significant difference between the guy on the boundary and the guy on the slot, right? Quarterback, same thing. Nickelbacks, boundary cornerbacks, very different positions, despite the fact they're literally listed as the same position.
Right. If you see there too, it goes by year. So like outside linebacker goes to 0 in 2019 and 2020, right? So they stop using that delineation. Now it's edge players, right? Edge didn't exist in 16, 17, right? There's zeros in that bucket. So
that's so interesting to see the evolution of these things.
Right. Like it's cool because the game has changed, right? And now the game is kind of have a little whiplash, right? So I got a 255-pound fullback, and like, what is the Mountain West going to do when North Dakota State comes out in that 22 personnel that, my Illinois State Redbirds couldn't figure out for 15 years? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like there is a little bit of a whiplash in the game of football right now, back to big tight ends and being able to kind of mash the ball. But it's cool because the draft process kind of gives you an insight into like what they think they're going to need going forward, right? What do you think the trend is going to be in football, and then how do they address it through like who they draft and like what type of players that they draft.
Right.
That's the most interesting part of the next couple of months, February, March, April, is seeing kind of where the priority ends up lying.
Right. Yeah.
And I went off kilter a little bit there, but that, like I said,
especially from GM to GM, that especially for those changing front offices and kind of like we've talked about that. This is, I'm in New England. We do a lot of Patriots stuff here, but we've talked about how it's kind of interesting for us because it's the first time in a few years that we've had consistency in the front office, and we can start kind of seeing the, archetype or whatever of player that we want at this position or that position. Not that we want, but Vrabel wants, Wolf wants, whoever it is. But yeah, we can actually see that consistency from year to year. and start to begin to understand it a little bit. I
And it's
guess
as big in the zag of football too. So like being in the AFC East, and obviously it's gone haywire, right? The coach has been fired. Players are trying to get out right now in Miami, but Miami was trying to do something different, right? They were, they brought in Tyreek Hill. They've got Waddle. They're trying, like Tua at his best, like they were trying to be this wide open, right? And then you got to turn around and play. Then you got to turn around and play the Ravens in the snow, right? And it was just like it looks like two different sports. And so
well, and it's similar to the issues you mentioned in as far as going from college to the pros. How much of what they asked you to do in college is translatable to the pros? I mean, what you mentioned just a couple minutes ago, like, oh, you get a big fullback and you get behind him at North Dakota State and you grind, and well, that's great. But what does that show pro, NFL talent evaluators if you're doing a lot of that and they're not in the NFL? So it can be a tough balance, I think, not just for players, but also for coaches, because if you're turning out, if you're a program that's churning out guys who are unprepared for the NFL, people who are interested in the NFL are probably going to stop looking to go there.
Yeah.
So
it also ties into, like, I think this is another fascinating aspect for like college to pro evaluation is the NFL game is so much different than the college game. To me, the college game is more similar to the high school game than it is the pro game, in that the ball's always in the middle of the field. So my lateral speed at the NFL level is important, but it's not necessarily as important as it is in college relative to the other players, because like it's hard to throw a screen out to the field like that linebacker's 6-7 yards closer in the pros because the ball's in the middle of the field. It's hard to be offensively, let's say, like creative in terms of spacing in the NFL because there's never a wide side and a short side. There is, but it's marginal. And so like, let's say a guy in the college level, and we see it all the time in high school level, right? Like a hustle kid, right? He's really good at he plays D end. They throw a fast screen out to the field and it gets blocked up pretty well. And that kid runs, like, let's say hits 19.4 miles on a GPS and tackles the guy at 4 yards, right? And he went all the way from, being a 5 technique to tackling that ball outside the far number, right? You just don't see that. They don't have that long of a run. It gets a little bit shorter in college and gets a lot shorter in the pros just because of the nature of the game. So that's where like lateral speed versus vertical speed is a little bit just, it's something to kind of think about when you think about like the differences of the game itself and the rules and the structure of the game.
Now, another question that I had in terms of how the speed translates from the track to the field. It also relates to weight, I think, to me anyway. And this is just me having some theories from like last year, specifically Matthew Golden, right? Matthew Golden got out there. He ran like a 4.28 or something like that last year. But I watched that kid's tape all year long, and everybody caught him. Everybody on the field. It was unreal. I mean, there was literally a game where every single player in the secondary caught up to him. I just didn't see like 4.28 speed. So, but without talking about a player like individually that you may not, have experience with or whatever, in your experience, what difference is there putting pads on? Because there's weight to pads, however many pounds exactly it is, I'm not sure, to be honest, but putting on pads and how much that hurts someone's speed, and does that affect it? So like Matthew Golden, for instance, like 180 pounds or something like that. A player that's like 220 pounds, or 210 pounds, 30, 40 pounds more, the pads are a smaller percentage of their body weight. It might not affect their speed so much. What do you think the difference is in terms of track speed and on-field speed, and how is that affected by the size of a player and their ability to carry those pads?
All right, so I'm going to get really in the weeds here. All right. All right, the many worlds theory, right? So everything that we do, butterfly effect, everything has a change in the outcome, right?
Okay.
So like the head coach that I work for prioritizes massively maximum speed ability, right? The reason is that if we can think about, we throw a fast screen out and the kid can run 70 yards to the end zone, right? If we work on max speed, he doesn't get caught, we score the touchdown. If he doesn't work on max speed. He doesn't improve that tool. He gets caught. Now the ball's down at the 2-yard line, and now we've got to put in this whole different, right? We don't do a ton of stuff under center. So now we're having to snap the ball 5 yards backwards to try to get 2 yards forwards, right? So the difference, so in high school, if I can create a speed difference in high school, it has exponential benefits. And when I'm talking like a track speed difference between me and you, if I can get the ball in the perimeter in space and I'm faster than your ability to cut down the angle, it's night and day, right? Now in college, the ball gets moved a little bit closer in the middle, right? And the speeds start to even out because now you got recruited because you were fast, right?
Right.
And then you get to the NFL and now the ball's in the middle, so it's never too far away from one sideline and everybody's fast. Right. So like I've heard this before when they talk about like evaluating high school basketball players. If all your highlight is run out dunks, that may be cool, right? But the amount of run out dunks in high school is more, I'm talking like high level high school basketball. The amount of that is of run out transition points is higher in high school than it will be in college. It's higher in college than it will be in the pros, right? So if I don't have an ability to play a half court offense, like, right, be a good teammate in the flow of an offense or be a good half court defender, that my athleticism is going, my athleticism in a vacuum is going to be less of a separator for me the further I get in my progression from high school to college, college to pro. And the
right, because you're surrounded by better players. So.
For sure. And the exact same thing is true. The exact same thing is true at the NFL level, right? Now everybody's fast relative to how big they are.
Right.
And so think about like like the guys that are actually faster than everybody else in the NFL. Like one, it's fleeting. What I mean by that is like they aren't faster forever. And two, like it. Like Tyreek Hill obviously is in that bucket. Like Tyreek Hill would just get an angle and just be gone. And you're like, oh, that looks different. I know there was a play a couple of years ago. He's with in Kansas City, and it's like 14 degrees outside. And the next gen stat said he hit like 21 miles an hour. Like that is stupid. Like that's totally different. But those guys are such unicorns at the NFL level, right? Because maybe this goes back to what you were saying. Maybe I'm faster than my peers, but I'm not big enough and my body's not going to hold up over 17, 18, 19, 20 games, right? And so I have to get bigger. I have to get stronger just for my protection. But does that protection make me a little bit slower? And does that take away my superpower? And does that – so you're right definitely about that. And then you also get into, and this becomes a lot more gray area and subjective, but abilities, perception, responsibilities. Or so I perceive a threat or I perceive an opening or I perceive a potential of a play, my ability to see it, respond to it, and then think like Le'Veon Bell just sitting in the hole for 3 seconds, right? Waiting for something to happen, right? Most people
or I have nightmares of Kenneth Walker from 2 weeks ago.
Exactly. You're right. Yeah, because everybody kept talking. He looks like Le'Veon Bell, right? No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, wild patience back there.
But that you have to be an elite perceiver of what's happening, right? To know like that hole's just big enough that if I give this amount of effort through that hole with this speed, that I can get through it. And that's one of those things where like if all I can do is run in a straight line, that's where some of those guys that are like the elite guys. I hope this makes sense. And Al Davis in his twilight years ran into this, right? He kept drafting the fastest guy, but the fastest guy, I think his whole thing was that same theory I just gave about what we're trying to do with our high schoolers, right? If I can just be fast enough, they'll never catch us and it won't matter, right? But in the NFL, it does matter because everybody's fast.
Yeah.
And so that's where like you better be a damn good football player first and then have prerequisite speed second, and then having elite speed, but having those two priors is what like it can make that tool itself the thing that can put you over the top.
Yeah, well, and being rugged enough too. I mean, because sometimes those things are opposite forces, right? I'm trying to be fast enough and I'm trying to be tough enough and be able to absorb those hits and so forth, because being kind of thin helps with the speed thing. Being thin does not help with the getting tackled by 280-pound defensive ends or whatever thing.
Exactly.
So it's a balance for sure. And I guess I'm trying to, just see, kind of the difference in on-field speed and track speed. It's tough to project, I guess. Um, so I guess after this conversation, as fans of the show are kind of going into the combine, breaking out their popcorn, getting ready to watch these 40-yard dashes they're excited to watch every year. How should they be watching them? What should they be looking for? And could you kind of give a couple maybe benchmarks, I guess, that you would look for if you're watching these in a player that, is like, oh, that guy's got some speed or, whatever. I know that the 0 to 10-yard splits, something like a 1.52, 1.53 is pretty elite for the NFL.
Yeah. I will tell you one of the things I love, and I won't share this and I won't disclose this, but I will tell you, like Tony Villani, every year there's a small group of us who he shares his projections for his athletes. So like he'll say, hey, this guy's running, this is his name, this is what I think he's going to run, and he's usually pretty spot on. And what he's doing is he's taking the chart I have and using those different metrics and with his own eye and being the top of his craft, able to kind of evaluate those things. So I kind of look at it like I don't know, like in a funny way, like a person, I don't know who, like, I'm not saying I bet on the sport, but like how a bettor would look at something. So this is what the estimate is that it's going to be. And then this is what it ends up being, and kind of comparing those two things. That's how I kind of watch it. Things to look for. Can I go off numbers and can I talk more about form?
Sure. Yeah.
So to me, like what's always really, really cool is how well the larger athletes can create the same shapes of their body that the elite athletes create, if that makes sense. So like when a lineman runs like a sprinter, not as fast as a sprinter, but like when I talk about when they get past the 25-yard line, do they have great posture? Do they have great knee lift? Do they have great dorsiflexion? Right?
Okay.
Like good front side mechanics, good backside mechanics. Backside mechanics meaning like, does the foot flare out behind the body, or do they have a tight heel recovery, right? Like a good sprinter would have.
Can you think specifically of a bigger guy that got your eye maybe in the last couple of years?
I'll be completely honest. I haven't watched it as much the last couple of years because the job I've had has just been, for instance, like this is combine week and we have 3 track meets this week. So I haven't had as much chance to just sit there and watch it.
How about maybe out of this 5 years that you were looking more specifically, does a guy stand out in your memory?
Well, I'll tell you, like there's some people to the opposite side of things. So I was going to say the opposite thing I was thinking about is like Emmanuel Forbes. If you watch his 40, he ran lightning fast. He never stands up, like never. He is bent over, kicking out the back, like exactly how you would tell a track kid not to run, but he's still fast. And some of that has to do, and I won't get too scientific here, but like interior pelvic tilt, right? Is an athlete designed to go forward, right? And forward meaning like you have to lead with your shoulders in your head, right? If you stand up straight on the football field and get laid out, like you're done, right? You have to be very precise that your head doesn't contact somebody else's head because then you get ejected, right? But like football players are playing the game in a forward way. Does that make sense? Yeah. And some of them never get out of that forwardness when they get into their max velocity mechanics on the 40. So like what I always think is super interesting is little guys who run poorly but fast and big guys that run well but slow.
Okay.
And then the cross references. When I say run well, I mean like they're hitting the visual markers for what a fast person should look like.
Okay.
But they don't have the outputs. But yeah, anybody over 320 that can go sub 5 is super interesting. And then just anybody who could kind of flirt around with that 4.2. What I look for is when I get into the splits, I look for subtracting the front 20 from the back 20 to find out, okay, who is the best accelerator, who is the best top end. And it's not always the same people.
Okay.
And now I'm going to get.
But do you feel like the front 20 is a better indicator of that than the 10-yard split? The 10-yard split gets all the fame, right?
Okay, I want to tell you right now, like I'm very happy with my life. So if I go missing, right, just okay. The NFL does a bad job. They do a bad job. The information they share with us is bad. Like the only thing that's actually out there that's within the realm of a couple thousandths of a second, but accurate, we don't ever see. We never see it, right? The FAT data is not out there. The guy with the button can have so what I was saying about like it's 0.08 seconds faster on average, right? But they've said that number itself deviates 0.05 from each other. So some of the numbers were compared to FAT were 1.15 faster, and some of them were 0.13 or 0.03 faster.
Okay.
I know I'm talking numbers on a visual thing, so it's
Yeah.
No. But what I'm saying is like I don't think they do a good job of actually evaluating those any kind of hand started 5-yard split.
Yeah.
Like a 5-yard acceleration started with a button in a guy's hand that's sitting at the 6-yard line is a garbage
fast
metric.
for you to get it.
It's a garbage metric because we wouldn't, if we tried to do that at a track meet and people paid all this money to have an FAT timer and that's how you started it, you'd be like, this is a joke, right? But we just kind of accept that because the NFL Combine does not want to come out and say, right? The NFL does not want to come out and say, listen, we haven't done the most accurate job we could have done. Actually, the fastest person wasn't 4.18. It was actually this, and now we have to recalibrate the whole thing. They don't want to do that, right? Because it's not sexy and it's not fun, so they don't do it.
That makes for shit TV, yeah.
Right. So what I'm saying is that in that thing, the 0 to 20 is more accurate than the 0 to 10, which is more accurate than the 0 to 5. Now, one of the things I do find super interesting, and I have this also turned on my X.com, is those next gen stats that get put out by the NFL, because they'll get into the GPS that the guys are wearing.
Right.
And if you look, I think the way they did it the last couple of years, and it'll be interesting to see, like when you look at them, it looks like they have GPS monitors in their shoulders, and they're just little tiny, like it. You wouldn't notice it unless you really look. But I know when they had like the No Bowl a couple of years ago, you could see the little thing in their shoulder, and some of those.
I feel like when it started out, it was in the chest, like an Iron Man thing almost.
Yes, yeah. So where they're putting those monitors will be interesting. I know I'm looking for kind of bizarre things that other people aren't looking for when they watch the combine, but
right now, but it makes sense given your background and all that.
And so like and then how fast did I get to 5 yards, and then how fast am I running at 5 yards are also not always like A1 of one of those metrics is not always A1 of the other metric.
Right.
And so that gets super interesting. So for instance, think of a player who goes in fast motion, right, on a play. So when the ball gets snapped laterally, they're running at some high velocity, let's say like 17, 18 miles an hour, right? Okay. Let's say the guy's running like a wheel route, right? He's crossing the field, running a wheel route up the sideline, but he brought his speed with him in the form of a motion, right? How fast that player actually gets from 0 to 5 is not nearly as important as how fast they're running at 5.
Okay.
In some of those separators, the next gen stats gets into, and people kind of misunderstand some of those stats, but kind of in my brain trying to figure those out so I can better understand the holistic approach to speed of a football player, I think is one of the really, really fun things to look at.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. So if the 40-yard dash might not be the most important event to happen at the combine this week in terms of measuring speed and usefulness on the football field, is it, or if it's not, what is the most important kind of athletic test we'll see? I know a lot of people talk about the 3-cone as well, being very important, but that's more lateral agility. What do you think is, from your perspective as a sports science guy, as a track and field and football guy, what's the most important kind of testing thing that happens this week to figure out, to translate to a football field?
The 40 is the best they got right now, right?
Okay.
The 5-10-5 is a dance. It's not an agility exercise. When I say it's a dance, what I mean by that, I don't mean that in an inflammatory way. If I know where all my steps are, if it's a memorized step pattern, it's a dance. If I don't know where I'm going, it's agility. right? There's a reactionary element to agility in the way that I define it, right? That's not the Webster's dictionary, but that's how I define dancing versus agility.
No, that makes sense, though. Yeah.
I can tell you what I think they should do.
Okay.
So, you know, like if you ever watch like a NASCAR race and they'll have the little arrow on top of certain cars, like the graphic where it'll show exactly how fast they're going.
Right.
They should do that with the players, and all the skill players should play 7-on-7 half field, and they should have little monitors over all their heads showing how fast they are.
That would be interesting.
So this quarterback,
can he good TV too? Okay.
Can he throw a post on a dime as the guy's running 21 miles an hour out of his break, right? 10 yards out of his break. Like that's what football speed is how quickly I can do those things, how quickly I can perceive those things, and some way where they would be able to show. And it doesn't have to necessarily be 7-on-7s, but like true, like 1-on-1s, like you would see at a high school camp, right? Now they're not going to do those because the commodity, which is the human beings, right? If they get hurt, then it's bad. But like to me, that's the best evaluator. Now, and I will say this too: what's happening at the combine is less important now than it's ever been. Like I've heard people talk about this. The most important thing right now at the combine are the interviews and the doctor visit. Yeah, the medical. Because, heck, Coach, we have 50 GPS units here at Grayson High School, right? The school I'm going to, Gainesville High School, has the vector units from Catapult, which is the same ones that all the schools in college football use, right?
Right. So you have all that information from all the colleges.
I don't know who posted this, but I don't know if it was a Freedom of Information Act thing, but somebody posted the invoice that Texas A&M got from Catapult, and it was like $500,000 for a season between all the tech they were using, and they were like they essentially had a person on call at all times. What I'm saying is that for cutting edge NFL people, they would rather call the college and say, "Hey, share your GPS data with us,"
right?
Than it is necessarily like, is there going to be some crusty guy there with a stopwatch who's going to say that's the be all end all? Yes, there is, but this next wave is much. I'm bald. I might look older than I'm mid-30s. Like anybody who's in my cohort of kind of interest in this stuff, it's far more about what data am I getting on those GPS monitors than in a real, in the wild, full speed, high level college environment is way more important than whatever a kid does, in his underwear in Indianapolis this week.
Right, and for sure, but still. We're gonna have some guy run himself into the first round every year, like we do every year. We all go into this event and go, the 40-yard dash, it's overrated. It's not everything. And then some guy runs something really fast and gets himself ran into the first round or the second round or whatever.
Can I give you an example real quick of something that I do find intriguing about that? So, like for instance, we had two of the top linebackers in the country this year at Grayson High School. One's at Texas, one's at Ole Miss. And the better we played on defense, the less interesting their GPS data was. Because if we're dominating on defense, is the ball ever getting out of the box, right? If I'm sacking the quarterback, he's not throwing it to a guy who's catching a ball and running away from us, right?
Right.
So I spoke at this at a clinic a couple years ago where it was like, okay, what game do you guys think was our fastest game? And a bunch of people in the crowd said, oh, that the game that was on all state television that you guys won 40-0. I go, I'm glad you brought that up. That was our slowest game of the season. Huh. And the reason it was our slowest game is because the defense that they were playing was very bend but don't break. So they weren't letting us throw deep shots over their head. They were very good at tackling. We were just able to chunk them. And on defense, we only gave up like 4 first downs. So the ball never moved quickly anywhere, right?
Right.
One thing I think is interesting, like let's say a guy, and I say this because I had to coach against him and he made my life a living hell, but CJ Allen at Georgia, right? Okay. I had to coach against him at Lamar. I was at Jackson High School as a defensive coordinator. He was the fullback and middle linebacker at Lamar County High School and just ruined my, it was one of the most embarrassing nights I've ever had professionally. But playing like the Mike linebacker at Georgia, he probably makes so many plays inside the box that like that max speed that he will hit in the 40 if he runs it, right? And I don't know if he's going to run it or not, but there's an example of a player. Like the better I am at defense, right? Maybe the less that data on the GPS would show if I'm fast or not.
That makes sense.
Does that make sense? Because
yeah, because like if you have, say, a shootout game, you're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth all game. But if you're in a defensive struggle, I mean, it's limited possessions, limited field covered, limited yards. You're just not covering as much ground.
Because I'm guessing that the GPS data from the Super Bowl was incredibly boring for the sports science world. Because the ball, sense, right. The offense wasn't very productive either way. The ball never moved much, right?
Right, and if you're moving, say, a combined 400 offensive yards between two teams in 60 minutes versus a combined 600 or 700 offensive yards in the same 60 minutes, obviously it's going to take you less time-wise,
right,
to cover those yards because you just have less time to cover those yards.
And one last
little, 60 minutes, one way or another.
One last little part I'll add to this, right? So I said earlier that the 40 was designed about the average coverage of a punt, right, to go make a tackle. When you talk about the two,
which is an interesting nugget. I did not know that, by the way.
The two longest runs you see in football, right, are coverages on punts and coverages on kickoffs. But the NFL has gotten rid of that.
Yeah.
So, we talk in kickoff coverage, right? We have a speed area, a combat area, and a finish area, right? Mm-hmm. And so the speed area is an area where if somebody's trying to block you in the speed area, you do not engage with them at all. Your job is to evade them at your maximum speed because you need to cover that space as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. Combat area is where I need to address a block because that block, if I run past it, may be the hole that ends up allowing the person to get through. The finish area is where we want to make the tackle, right? Yeah. They've essentially, in the NFL, they've eliminated the speed area.
Yeah.
So how quickly I run those, forgive me, I don't know the exact 5-yard. They kick off from the 35 or the 40, right?
Yeah, I think it's the 35 now. It's
and they start, and then the coverage team starts on the 35, I want to say.
I think so, yes.
So you're taking that 30 yards out of, like, I'm sure GPS loads for special teamers in the NFL have dropped drastically since that point because that's taking out 30 high-speed yards, if I'm doing the math right on that, 30 high-speed yards every time there's a kickoff.
Right.
And so speed is a little bit less important on special teams now than it was before just because of the change of the rules.
Right.
And so I wonder
if... Well, and that's where we're seeing kind of running backs have a lot more success at kickoff returns than like wide receivers. You used to see a lot of like speed wide receivers be on the kick return. And now we're seeing a lot more running backs who are kind of more lateral movement guys than straight line speed guys typically, you know?
And this is where it gets super interesting. So in the draft itself, right, I draft a player, right? Does the trends of the sport and the changing dynamics of the sport, can I understand it, but it still doesn't make me not draft that player? Or do I understand the sport in a different way and now I draft a different person? And now the trajectory of that person in my franchise is now different forever because of that choice that I made. And so I don't know if somebody's looked at I don't know if there's ever been a decision made at the NFL level recently in the last couple of years where they go, this guy's a really good special teamer. Like we could plug and play him now, but all the big tackles he made inside the 20-yard line on kickoff at whatever college, right? Like that superpower he has been negated by the rules. So now that player maybe has less value to us because every time he doesn't get blocked, he makes a tackle on inside the 20. And then every time he does get blocked, he never makes the tackle, right? Well, now nobody's going unblocked in that, right? Or guys are getting like they're finding the best guy and they're double teaming him, or like the schemes look much more like offense defense than it looks like spread out special teams.
Right.
So where like what are things that a guy necessarily things that like I said earlier about the high school basketball player on run out dunks, right? It's cool, but is that going to translate? Are there things that they look at in college prospects coming up that they're like, yeah, that's a really good trait for what the game he's playing, but does it translate to the game that we're playing?
Well, right. And if your superpower, as you said earlier, is becoming more and more irrelevant, then your draft stock slowly decreases and it's completely out of your control, essentially.
Yeah, I mean that happened to the fullback, right?
Yes.
Right, and now
it happened to the old school linebacker. It happened to a lot of lot of positions that have just kind of been phased out a little bit.
Right. And now it's an H, right? And now
Yes.
and they want to be considered a tight end because if I'm a tight end, I get paid a lot more money than if I'm a fullback. Yeah. So what something does and what something's called are not always. Sometimes you can change the name of something, but that doesn't change what it is. What a rose by another name wouldn't it smell as sweet, as William Shakespeare once said.
Right. All right. Let me just finish this up with I got 2 questions for you. I'd like to know, what is the best 40 time you have ever seen in person? And I would like to know one myth about speed, about the 40-yard dash, about the combine, whatever, something in that you would just like to put to bed forever. You'd never like to hear again.
Okay, so the first one, I've helped out a lot at combines down here in Georgia, just like prospect combines, because people will hire me to come and set the lasers up. Or I will say I do think I have one of the best trigger fingers for stopwatches anywhere in the Southeast United States. But I had a young man that came out and he ran like on a hand time, like 4.3 something.
Okay.
And I was like, yo, like, how about this? And so I was like, either my stopwatch is broken or not, like, okay, he's going to go run another one, ran 4.39 again. And it was a kid that was kind of off the radar. A couple months later, he got offered by University of Georgia, and now he's at Georgia. And so that was one that I guess what I'm saying is that the breadcrumbs of, oh, this kid's really, really, really fast. I think Roland something, white kid from North Oconee High School. He was one that, like, if anybody down here in Georgia, you'll know who I'm talking about. But there was breadcrumbs early, and then boom, it popped, and it was like, oh, that makes sense. I bet he went to camp and ran something stupid fast, right?
Yeah.
What was the second part of your question?
Just kind of like, what's one thing that you hear, not necessarily myth, but just something you hear about the 40-yard dash or the combine events or so forth that you wish you didn't ever have to hear again? Common misconception, if you will.
The people who say that it doesn't have validity or it's not football. Like, we all get that. Like, that's not. So I hope this, what I'm about to say, makes sense. I love the 40 from the standpoint of, like, it's cool to watch giant people run really fast. That's a bucket of it in and of itself. Now, does that bucket spill over into other things? Right? Yes, it does. It spills over into being a good football player because I'm big and fast, right? But like, it doesn't have as much transfer as you think it does. I know that. That doesn't mean I'm not super amused by some 330-pound Polynesian guy running 4.9. Like, it's still really, really cool. One idea I've had, and so I may end up doing this someday. One thing I think would be really cool is to run a track meet, but run it like a wrestling event, where instead of having all these different events, you would have weight classes for the 100. So your school would bring, like, who's your best 270-pound plus 100-meter runner, and have those guys run.
Fastest fat guy.
Right. So, like, what I'm saying is that thing I just made up, right? That I've been thinking about this a long time, but I would love to actually do that someday. But that is what the combine is, right? You get to see all these different body types and people from all over the world come who are elite at this thing, or they think they're elite at this thing, or the NFL needs to figure out if they're elite at this thing, out there running as fast as they possibly can. And it's just really, really cool to see. So, like, yeah, I know it doesn't have ultimate transfer. That doesn't mean it's not, like, one of my favorite things to watch on television all year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's a lot to, it's funny because it's the combine's importance does kind of wane year after year nowadays, especially like you said, with the kind of the GPS data and stuff like that. But personally, I think there's still a lot of interesting stuff to take from it. Whether it be the interactions between the coaches and the players on the field, you can see in the drills. And, I think there's a lot to take from that. And then also kind of the media circus that it's become, it's kind of, there's a lot of news and interactions and social stuff that comes out of it that isn't even on the field.
Well, and we talked earlier about RAS and Math Bomb and the work he does, right?
Mm.
The thing that's super interesting about, like, he puts out, like, the cohort data and then the average data over time. And at the end of the day, like, he says this, one person, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but, like, yes, one person could be an outlier, right? But on average, the guys who end up being all pro are pretty dang athletic, right?
Right.
Like, it's not a random blindfolded dartboard throw who ends up being good at pro football. Like, you have to at least have an eclipses a baseline, a threshold, right? And there's not that many guys that end up like, there's not that many guys who go run slow as a running back and then have a great NFL career.
Right.
There's ones that don't run as well as they wanted to, or don't run great, but like usually the ones that are really slow don't get drafted and don't have success, right? So seeing that, like the offensive linemen too, like the offensive linemen today are more athletic than they've ever been. They're also bigger than they've ever been. So you don't have to be fast, but you can't be slow.
Yeah, I mean, we saw Will Campbell last year run like a 4.97 or something like that in the 40, which is pretty quick for a guy his size.
Absolutely.
One last question, just because you have the benefit of seeing kind of the next generation. How long until we see somebody break that combine 40-yard record, do you think?
Oh, shoot. I don't know. This year?
Do you think so? You think are players getting faster and faster?
I mean, the thing is like if the aggregate is getting faster, then the fastest person is like inevitably it will get faster, right? And then the dumbest part of this whole thing is that record has everything to do with the guy sitting there with his finger on the button at 6 yards, right? So like, were you great because of human error? Like being good, I hope that this is being good or being really good or being exceptionally good puts you gives you a chance to run a stupid fast time, right? But it's only that human error that allows the elite of the elite of the elite.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. It's kind of the balls and strikes of baseball. I'm not a big baseball guy, but it seems to me that it would be very easy to use digital to call balls and strikes. You can see where the ball goes over the plate and all of that. It would be very easy to use laser and all that for this, and instead we're kind of old school with the stopwatch. Yeah.
It's even worse because we have it. The lasers exist. They're there. They're collecting the data. We just don't get to see it. So that's maybe the most hilariously infuriating part of the whole thing.
All right. Well, listen, that's going to be the end of the episode there. Unless you have anything you would like to add, I'd like to thank you so much for your time. Joe Stokowski, you can look up the article that I referenced for this just by looking up, I think, Joe Stokowski and Speed Goals. Decoding the 40 is the title of the article. That's Joe. He's the Sultan of Speed, the fastest trigger finger this side of the Mississippi when it comes to the stopwatch. Anything that you'd like, anywhere that people can kind of check out the results of your work or whatever. Normally I have other writers on here, so they plug stuff.
Sure. Yeah, social media. I'm on X most of all, but just at Coach Stokowski. If you want to reach out, I'd love to talk about this. I talk to college coaches, high school coaches every day about this stuff. So it's obviously a huge passion of mine. And I'm very excited about my next step at the high school I'm going to, because we'll have unparalleled access to technology that you only see at the college and pro levels. So I'm going to be a pig in shit here in a couple of months.
Nice. Well, congratulations on your move upwards, and thank you so much again for your time. I couldn't be more grateful for you. And I think this will be a very informative episode for the viewers. So thanks again for your time and expertise. That's going to do it for today, folks. Come on back tomorrow. Remember, like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends, all that sort of stuff. All right. Thanks again. Have a great day, guys.